While it is important to gain clarity with respect to this construct of more, it's important to gain clarity on a number of issues, and that's what we're going to be focusing on this year. One of the things to keep in mind is that when you have a word or a construct, that word or construct can have multiple meanings, and it is important to get clarity. And so, what we are focusing on right now is getting knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, but we are first and foremost seeking clarity, because without clarity, we will not have appropriate knowledge, we will not have appropriate understanding of this knowledge, and we will not have wisdom regarding what to do with the knowledge and the understanding. So for now, clarity is power. What we're going to be doing is looking at this question of Jacobites and Moors, which ones? We addressed this quite a while back, but it's important to bring it to the forefront again because this name is gaining import for a number of reasons. And so we are looking at this construct of Jacobite and asking the question, as with Moor, which one? One of the things that happens is that people often automatically assume when they hear the word Jacobite or they read about Jacobites or someone is a Jacobite, they automatically assume that it is related to the Stuart clan. They automatically assume that it's related to either supporting or not supporting the Stuart clan. However, there's a Jacobite that actually predates these Jacobites. And there's also indication that there is some connection between these Jacobite names that might not be on the surface. And so we're just going to look very quickly at the other Jacobite, because there's another Jacobite that refers to the Orthodox Syrian Christian Church. Now, we recently talked about the origins of Christianity. Where was Christianity founded? Where was it started? And it was started in this area. And so this church and this priesthood is in this particular area. And this construct of Jacobite is related to this group of people. And so therefore, context matters. In addition to the patriarch Jacob, you have a few other Jacobs who have come about throughout history. And those Jacobs are also associated with this construct of Jacobite. And so what you have is King James 6 and 1. And then you have some Jacobs that are related to Syria. And this is just to get some foundational clarity related to the word Syria. Syria is another word for Aram. Aram is the foundation for the word Aramean. Aram is also considered an Israelite in scripture. Now, while the Syrian church is foundationally, of course, in Syria, you have branches in different places throughout the world, and Britain is one of those places. And so there's a foundation in the east, but you see branches in the west. And what we're going to look at are some Jacobites that some people might not think of when they talk about Jacobites, but there is another Jacobite that may or may not be related to the patriarch Jacob and may or may not be related to King James 6 and 1. It's not certain that there is a connection or a disconnection. So we are just putting that out there so that you can think about it, but just so you will also know that there is a distinction. So there is something, some entity known as a Jacobite that is not automatically tied to those individuals who are fighting in the rebellions. And as you can see here, in terms of church history, the Syriac Orthodox Church dates back to the beginning of Christianity. And this is where you start to see some conflation going on here, because you see the Jacobite Syrian Church is related to India, Iraq, and Syria. And so there is a significant relationship between the Jacobite Syrian Church and India. And so there are some roots as well as branches in this particular area. You will also note that there's a relationship between the Jacobites of Europe and India. And so this is definitely something to keep in mind. And this is the Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church in India. And you will note the person who is identified as their holiness or their supreme head has a unique name. And so we're going to address that when we look at the second part of Jacobites and Moors, which ones? And this is just so that you can get a closer look. And this is an additional depiction. Now, one thing to keep in mind, according to the history that we have, these Jacobites predate the Jacobites that we have in the rebellions and those who were supporting the Stuart clan. However, there's also a possibility that there is some sort of connection and that those who represent the Stuart clan actually emerged from this particular area and then migrated into the area known as Western Europe. And so now we're going to address the question of Moor, which one? Now, we've already addressed the need to gain clarity with respect to the word Moor. So if someone says the word Moor to you, you need to gain clarity about what Moor means to them. And so in this matter, context matters. And so as with the Jacobite situation, you have a situation where Moor is also associated with not just the Moriscos and the Marranos, but Moor is associated with the Orthodox Syrian Christian priesthood. And what you will find, even in the context of the priesthood, are multiple iterations of Moor. In this particular instance, you will find that the heads of the church body have the name Moor as a part of their name, as a part of their title. And if you look on the screen, you can see multiple individuals with Moor as a part of the name. And this is the Moor, M-O-R. This word Moor, this root Moor, also pops up with respect to the Holy Celtic Church International. If you research this particular church body, you will notice these interesting lines of succession. There is a Roman Catholic line of succession. There is a Hebraic Celtic line of succession. There is an Irish line of succession. So it's an interesting list in terms of the successions. And here you see very clearly this construct of Moor. And in this instance, you see Moor twice. You see Morin, Moor, and you see this in both titles. Now, this is when it gets a little tricky. You see here that Morin is the name of a warrior group of the Maasai people in East Africa. Morin, however, is also associated with individuals in Europe, and so it's a family name, it's a clan name. And here are the details. If you get a chance, also look at the names, the translations of those Gaelic surnames. You might see your surname in there, and sometimes it's a little difficult to see the Gaelic surname and then automatically think of the anglicized surname, because sometimes there is a total disconnect. But it is definitely worth looking at that list. It's in the community section. And so what you see here with this name Morin is that it is related to the Gaelic and it is related to some sept names. So this is a family name in terms of Irish history. It's also related to Spanish history. You also have a French variation of this same name. Now, what's interesting here is that Morin means more, and it means great, and so are large. And we've discussed that also recently. And so what you have with these names associated with these priesthoods are these constructs of more, or great, large, with this Morin, more. And it's also important to make note of the changes in spelling across languages. And so when you go from one language to the next, they may just swap out some letters. So you can see in French, Same name, same meaning, but the A is replaced with an I. And so while sometimes individuals will think that the word more or the construct more is associated with a particular group of people related to phenotype or related to religion, you can see here that this word more crosses those religious lines, crosses ethnic lines. It crosses multiple lines because in this particular instance, this context, it means something very specific related to size. The Irish and Scots keep substantial records in terms of heredity. And one of the things they note about this particular name is that this name is associated with a very early history. And you also see where they indicate that the first Moran, this old name Moran, is associated with what they saw as a single all-powerful God that arrived before Christianity. And so in this respect, you have this idea of a God being the great God, or what some people might identify as a most high God. Also associated with the Syrian church, you have these other constructs like M-A-R. And in these instances, you often see a relationship between the M-A-R and Mary in this instance. And so again, more, mar, mer, it's not always the same thing. It doesn't always mean the same thing. And so you really want to get a handle on what it is that people are talking about when they are using these words and these derivatives. And here you see an example of this with the Mariavite succession. And this means life of Mary. And these are just some additional notes coming out of Britannica for you to look at related to the Jacobites and Syrian church history. And these are additional reference notes. And these are additional reference notes related to the Syrian Christian church, the Roman Catholic church, and Babylon. As we wrap this up, you can see why in 2022 clarity is important. Knowledge is powerful, but clarity is essential. And so in order to be able to use the knowledge, to be able to have understanding, to be able to execute wisdom, you have to have that clarity. And so now is the time to start insisting upon clarity. So when people are talking to you, they are communicating with you, they are sharing facts, you need to be clear about what is being shared. You need to make sure that you are on the same page, at least in the same book, in the same library, in the same city. You want to make sure that you are on the same page. You want to make sure that when they say more, you understand the more that they are talking about, and it's the more that you are understanding. You want to make sure when people are talking about the Jacobites that that is the Jacobite that you are talking about. And this is the case with any construct. And so it's important in 2022 to not just accept the information, but to examine the information for yourself, to cross-reference and double-check for yourself. Question not only the information, but the person who is providing the information. And regardless of the information that you are acquiring, always remember that context matters. Clarity is power. Take care. See you soon.